I want to say it again. I want to say this for I guess the 100th time.
Mhm.
It is so disappointing to me to see what Tommy Tuberville has been, because I wanted him to be a better person than I just wanted him to be, to have gone out and sat in the living rooms of all of these kids all across this state, to have had firsthand interactions with people who dealt with some of the harshest economic realities, who have struggled through the education system, both lower and higher in our in our state, to have done that for the amount of time that he did. It's so troubling to watch him pivot to just this lazy, offensive, performative bullshit. Alrighty, welcome back. Alabama Politics this week. Josh Moon, David Person. Our thanks to Amanda Push Him Down and Check on Him, and who's running for the fourth congressional district.
Push check.
Yeah, Push and Check. And Representative Pedlin Warren. Man, we got to get Representative Pedlin Warren back on here more often. Man, she is great.
She was great.
Really is. Yeah, she's a lot of fun to have on, and I mean, like I said, it's rare that you get somebody on who will just say to you, "Listen, we don't know what we're talking about here. We need to get some experts in." And that I'm telling you, if we had more people like that go out and seek the information and try to be better educated on complicated matters, because look, everybody can't know everything all the time. You can't know it all, okay? And anybody who tries to pretend that way is just ridiculous. And so, our thanks to her for spending some time. Our thanks to the folks at Wind Creek Entertainment for continuing to sponsor. Our thanks to the folks at SPLC for continuing to sponsor as well, and making this thing go around. We'll have Jerome Dees on next week from SPLC to talk about a number of legal issues. He's basically our legal expert at this point, and I always like having attorneys on. I have good conversations with attorneys. I typically talk to roughly 15 to 20 attorneys a week, just doing what I do. And I've carved out a nice little niche of guys and women, I don't just mean men, but folks, I guess I should say, who are I feel like very in tune, very smart. They have a lot of knowledge of various things. Carl Cole, we had him on. Carl is one of the
Real
best.
sharp guy.
Absolutely. The folks down in Montgomery who I dealt with for years. I mean, the Joe Espys of the world. I don't talk to Joe every week. Don't get me wrong. That's certainly not happening now, because I think you got to have at least $1,500 an hour or so to get Joe on the phone every hour. But I mean, it's because that's the man, as they say. But I think the more conversations you have like that, the folk with those kind of educated people and people who deal in the law and who are very measured and try to remove emotion from a lot of things, I think those folks really give you the best perspective on a lot of different issues. So anyways, just my own little personal opinion. So talk to an attorney every now and then, I guess, is what I'm trying to tell you. All right. Before we wrap up and get out of here, I wanted to go over our bonehead. And like we said before, we could really name the bonehead, our right-wing bonehead award, after him, and really just stop. We could just
maybe we should do that. Maybe we should do that.
The Tommy Tuberville Memorial Bonehead Award. I mean, because I've said this. I want to say it again. I want to say this for I guess the 100th time.
Mm-hmm.
It is so disappointing to me to see what Tommy Tuberville has become, because I wanted him to be a better person than I just wanted him to be, to have gone out and sat in the living rooms of all of these kids all across this state, to have had firsthand interactions with people who've dealt with some of the harshest economic realities, who have struggled through the education system, both lower and higher in our, in our state, to have done that for the amount of time that he did. It's so troubling to watch him pivot to just this lazy, offensive, performative bullshit.
Do you think this is who he always was, or do you think this is something that he's doing just for political advantage?
I think it's for political advantage. And I don't think it's out of some intelligence, where I believe that George Wallace's stances on things and the way that he did things, there was some intelligent purpose that was put into it, that he was he felt like that he had studied the numbers and done these things. And I feel like that with Tuberville, it's just simply a means to an end. It's hey, I'm going to do this because it's going to rile up the right people, and it's going to make me a villain of the right people, and then I can use that to make myself a victim to these people who I'm trying to then lure in to vote for me. And I'm going to try to scare the hell out of these people by vilifying these other folks that are really in an extreme minority in this state, and who most of my constituency knows very little about. And we're talking about Muslims, of course. I mean, anybody. I mean, come on. At this point, what the hell are we talking about? It's the continue to just, the posting of the picture of Mandani, Mandani, the mayor of New York City, and talking about the enemy is inside the gates, and it's the guy who was at the White House just a couple of weeks ago, and Donald Trump was talking about how much he loves him and how much he would love to live in the New York City run by the guy, and how apparently the two have developed a great friendship and great respect, and now here's Tuberville out talking about him being an enemy simply because of his faith, and his religious faith. It's
a twofer for him too, though, Josh, because it's not just he's indicting him because of his faith, but I think there's also the George Wallace subtext, because Mondami's a brown-skinned man, and I think it gives him a twofer. That's what I think. I think he's doubling down on Mondami for that reason, my opinion.
And you may be right. I just, it's just so, it's such, I don't know. It's so dumb that it's hard to really wrap your head around it being effective in any way. I mean, the way the callous sort of attacks, that he has made on Muslims and the Islamic faith. And look, everybody at this point knows that I'm as likely to criticize one religion as I am the other, because I don't think that you can take one and find any worse teachings or I'm trying to look for words that's not insulting to all religions as I'm doing this, but fictional stories as you are with another religion's fictional stories and poor teachings about things. We could look through the Bible and compare it to the Quran. We could look through just any sort of religious text. I think you could probably find a number of really problematic things that instruct people to do really problematic things, and that certain people, when obsessed by their religions and poor teachings and the misconstruing of those religions, have taken those teachings and have done really horrible things. If I'm not mistaken, there was a bombing in this state of an abortion clinic. There was a bombing of a federal building in Oklahoma City. There have been people who have killed and murdered millions of people in the name of Christianity.
Sure,
There have
sure.
been people who have murdered people in millions in the name of Islam. We have our worst terrorist attack ever, you know.
And I would add that the enslavement of my ancestors was done in the name of Christianity. So yes. you're right. And by the way, you know, just to get back to Tuberville for a minute and his Islamophobia before I go back to what you were saying earlier, you know, it is astonishing to me that people haven't figured out by now that while the moment that a Muslim does something, we automatically go into this Islamophobic, you know, these Islamophobic diatribes. But if a Christian kills somebody or commits some heinous act, you know, mass murder, nobody says, "Oh my God, it's the Christians. We need to lock them up. We need to deport them." You know, there's an obvious lack of logic and consistency in the thinking there. All right. Well, but now, as somebody going back to what you said earlier, as somebody who is you know, I read the Bible every day and I absolutely, you know, I'm a member of a church, you know, I do agree with the essence of what you're saying, which is that there are things in the Bible, and anybody that has read the Bible knows this to be true. And I can say this unequivocally and unabashedly as a believer in Christianity. There are things in the Bible that nobody in their right mind would do today or advocate for today.
Right.
You know, and I've said it on this program before, on this podcast before, I'll say it again. Nobody is going to say that, as it calls for in the book of in one of the Levitical in some of the Levitical laws in the Old Testament, nobody would say that we should be stoning our children for being disrespectful.
No.
Nobody would say that we should be stoning women who are caught in adultery.
Right.
Nobody would, I mean, there's a list of things. Nobody would damn anybody to hell or say that they should face some kind of severe punishment for wearing, you know, clothes that have mixed fabrics or for eating shrimp. Nobody would say that, you know, and we all know that, you know, so you're right about the fact that what has happened in Christianity is that people have not used critical thinking and they have not been intellectually honest, or I would even argue theologically honest about some of what is in the Bible. Now that to me doesn't disqualify the Bible as a valuable book for people of faith. I read it, like I said, every day myself. But I also know that when my son was disrespectful to me, which was very rare, but when he was, I didn't look for a stone or call for people to stone him.
You didn't pick up a rock.
I mean, come on, people.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, you know, I'll say I equated a lot the double standard out of this. It's kind of the same way that we treat black people and white people in our criminal justice system, and we do it often. It's why so many people get so offended whenever you say that race is a major factor in here, is because so many people don't even realize that that's what they're doing. And you see it all the way through. You see it all the way through our education system, is where black kids are sent to the principal's office and punished more severely than white kids are. And it's not, I don't believe it's a conscious decision on the part of many of the teachers and stuff. They just simply do not relate as well to these children as they do to these other children. And so they treat them more harshly. All of a sudden, the black kid talking in class is a much bigger problem than the white kid who probably just didn't get a good night's sleep. You know, he probably just having a little bit of a trouble, you know, where the black kid is just very disruptive and cannot be tolerated in this setting, you know, to all of the other children. And it happens all the time. You look at it, I mean, in kindergarten, in pre-K, they've gone back and looked at some of the kids who've gotten in trouble and studied the disciplinary actions that were, first of all, initiated, and then what what level they extended to. And the black kids were, by and large, treated more harshly in all of those cases. And do I believe that all of those people are inherently racist and would want to deny their basic rights to black children? No. But it's about their relatability to those other children. And so they understand better the white kids because they were once white kids. And that's who they're familiar with. It's who they grew up with. It's who they're friends with. It's who their friends groups are. So they have this better understanding and comprehension of those kids. And so therefore they're better understanding of their lives. And now these black kids are having the same lives, but they're not around them. They're not familiar with those kids. And it's the same way with what we're talking about here, I think.
Well, I certainly am not going to dispute what you're saying, but I do think there is a layer of complexity to this thing because there are, I believe, the vast majority of people today, well, let me be more specific. The vast majority of white people today, I think if you ask them, would say, no, we should not return to the days of Jim Crow. No, we should not have separate water fountains. Yes, we should treat everybody equally under the law. They would support all of that. I think the vast majority. But I do think there's a layer of complexity here in that there are still, and you pointed out some of it, there are still deeply seated, I think, I'll say, prejudices that people hold to.
Sure.
And they may be unconscious at times, but I think in many cases they are very conscious. And you talked about in education. Another example, Josh, is in healthcare. Studies have shown that doctors, that they look at black patients differently than they look at white patients. They assume a higher tolerance of pain with black patients than with white patients. They often will take prescribe a different course of treatment, from what I understand of these studies, with black patients than they do with white patients. There are documented racial inequities that come into place with healthcare. Harvard professor Dr. David Williams has done a tremendous amount of research on this, and also Dr. Ron Wyatt, who is actually based here in North Alabama. He and Dr. Williams and others have worked together and done a lot of research on this. So I think there's an interesting sort of complexity. There's some layers.
Yeah, I think all that goes together.
To discrimination in this country.
Oh, listen, I think all of that kind of goes together, though, because I think I think that the large majority of the people who are treating those patients differently would tell you that they are. I think they would be genuinely confused to hear someone call them racist, or to hear them say that they are mistreating someone. And because I think that their biases and their prejudices come from a place of a lack of understanding and unfamiliarity with a lot of these folks. I do. I think that they judge based on preconceived notions. They've judged on prejudices, and I'm not saying that they should not be held accountable for those things at all. But I do think that it's something over the course of their lives has seeped into them, and that they have not made this conscious decision to say to you that I don't like black people, or that I don't like Hispanic people, or anything like that. But I think that they do treat those folks differently because of a lack of familiarity with them. And I think it's the same way in healthcare, in education, in lending. Where we see a lot of folks. I had a friend of mine who is a lender who I've used for years, and I made a statement one time about lenders being harder on black customers. And he said, what? There's no way. There's so many rules set up that we have to follow. There's no way that that's true. And so I sent him the data on this, the many studies that have been done. And he was genuinely confounded. And it included now his lender that he worked for. The bank that he worked for was part of this. And he was genuinely surprised and shocked to learn about this thing. And so, but I think those things seep in. And I think it's the same when we talk about the religion here, where we're willing to give Christians more of a pass for whatever it is that they're doing, because we're more familiar with them. We're understanding of what they're doing and how they're excluding that stuff about the stoning. I mean, come on, who does that anymore? Except for the folks living on the compounds somewhere, and where we're not willing to do the same thing, even though it's in the same percentage or maybe even lesser among the Islamic faith. Over here, where those folks don't believe that crazy hardline horseshit about killing all infidels or whatever in the hell it says, in their book of faith. And so I think that's the reason why we have such a juxtaposition between those two things, is it's simply the familiarity that we have with so many Christians now, who we know that most of them go to church on Sundays in their nice Sunday clothes, and they believe and they, pray for you and tell you all these things, but they're not going to bomb an abortion clinic,
Right.
And so we also then forget about the parts of that group that hate homosexuals because, this one little bitty part in this one thing that they've chosen to pay attention to, even though they've ignored the 18 other little things right before it that also tell them that they have to hate these people wearing the clothes of mixed garments and planting their crops side by side, and they've got to stone their daughters, not touch the skin of a pig, and all of those other things. They've ignored all of that, but they picked this one little thing out to decide that they hate this group of people. Okay.
Yeah. And I'll just add to that. And I think you're exactly right. And I've been saying that for years myself, that we cherry pick the text that we want to embrace in Christianity. We do a lot of cherry picking. But I would also add, if you really look at those texts that talk about homosexuality, they're talking about same-sex acts, not same-sex people. And I think that's a distinction that is often failed. They fail to make that. And I would even add that even in talking about those same-sex acts, again, my question has always been, if we understand that we can stop, we don't have to obey the scripture that says to stone children who are disrespectful, or that people that touch pigskins, as you just said earlier, are unclean, and we got to treat them like they're unclean, then how is it that we don't understand that maybe we're wrong also to condemn people in consensual same-sex relationships? Yeah. Now, if you're talking about, a relationship between an adult and a child, okay, but if you're not talking, when you're talking about consenting adults, loving relationships, or even if they're not loving, just relationships between consenting adults. If we can evolve in our thinking on these other things, my question is, why haven't we evolved on that?
Well, this is the thing. This is the point that I would make to everybody. Okay.
Yeah.
Is it's not that we don't stone people for having same-sex marriages or same-sex relationships because we are a Christian nation. It's not that we don't treat people poorly or stone them for whatever acts that they have, or that we don't kill people in the name of Christianity as a country because we're a Christian nation. The reason we don't do it is because we're a nation of religious freedom. That's the reason why we don't do it. Okay. Yes. That's the reason why, is because the religion, whatever's in those texts, has no bearing on how we behave as a country, because we decided, our founding fathers decided, that we were going to have religious freedoms here. That's why we don't do this. That's why a good portion of our country is not bombed all to hell, because we're not fighting over religious ground somewhere, or religious ideas, or whatever. That's the reason why those things aren't happening. It's not because we don't have awful things in the Bible, because there's plenty of awful things in there. All right. Or because, we've just controlled the Muslims over here, or controlled whatever religion, that we have. That we have religious freedom for everybody to participate and to practice or not practice whatever ideas they want to. And that's the reason why we don't have these problems.
That's right.
So,
that's exactly
it would be nice if the next potential governor of the state of Alabama would understand that very, very basic concept.
And it's very dangerous that he doesn't.
Yes. Very, very dangerous. And it's very dangerous that he somehow, and his team, seems to believe that saying these very offensive, very hateful things and very unconstitutional things is a pathway to victory for him. That is probably the most troubling thing.
That's right.
All righty. Till next week, y'all be safe out there.
Peace.